All right, let's go back to a very similar example. This is the example that we used to talk about the first derivative test. But now I want you to say, what do you notice about the second derivative at these extrema? So remember, the second derivative is concavity. Let's look at this first one. Well, in this whole region, what do you know about the concavity? This whole region is concave down. Everywhere around, and specifically at the local maximum. For a minimum, notice here, it's concave up. And that's not a coincidence. Remember when I explained concavity and I said, well, a lot of times we can think of concave up things as looking like this. Concave up things are going to have minima. And I said, we can think about concave down things as looking kind of like this. Concave down things are going to have maxima. That's basically the second derivative test. And the good news is you don't have to check complicated intervals and regions and pick points. To do the second derivative test, essentially all you have to do is look at the concavity at the critical point. And you might have said, Jason, you haven't looked at any of these. Yeah, I wanted to tell you the good news first. The good news for the second derivative test is you just have to look at one point. The bad news is that, yeah, it's coming. Well, here, second derivative does not exist, which is not a big problem because there's no extremum here. But there is an extremum here. It's a critical point where the first derivative doesn't exist. But if the first derivative doesn't exist, well, the second derivative doesn't exist either. So this is a problem already. Right? If the second derivative not existing is not useful because maybe it's a max. Maybe it's not a local extremum at all. And again, over here, the second derivative doesn't exist. And here, the second, okay, so we've got some problems. And in fact, we even have more problems than this. But I won't talk about it just yet. So there's good news and bad news with the second derivative test. But let me tell you what the second derivative test actually is first. So to start off, the second derivative test requires us to have a special kind of critical point. It only applies to critical points where the first derivative is 0. So this doesn't apply, doesn't work for critical points with the first derivative not existing. Right? We can't use it for these critical points because the second derivative doesn't exist either. It doesn't tell us anything. So that's already some bad news. Second derivative test doesn't always work. It's only for certain critical points. But for our purposes in business applications, that's not a big deal because most of our functions are continuous and we'll have infinitely many derivatives. So not a big deal for us. So if we have a function that's concave down at our critical point, right? If it's concave down at our critical point, we have a local max. If the second derivative is positive, remember that means concave up, we've got a local min. If the second derivative is equal to 0, we know absolutely nothing. We have been wasting our time. If the second derivative is 0, nothing we can say. We don't even know whether it is an extremum. Could be a max, could be a minimum, could be neither. So second derivative equals 0 could look like this. X to the fourth. That'd be a local minimum. Could look like this. X to the fifth. That would be neither. Could be a local maximum too. If the second derivative is equal to 0, we just get kind of sad because the test doesn't tell us anything. But hopefully that won't happen. So again, there's an advantage to the second derivative test. More straightforward, you just need one point. But sometimes it's hard to find the second derivative. And sometimes it just doesn't work. So the first derivative test is a little annoying because, again, this is kind of messy to set up. But at least we know the first derivative test will always work for a continuous function. Next video, I'll actually show you how to use it. Anyway, bye-bye. Wait, I said I was going to say something different today. Jason Barnett, signing off.